One of the first bold experiments came from the Mesonychians. These were hoofed mammals, but unlike any hoofed animal alive today, they were carnivores, predators that looked nothing like wolves or cats, but more like stocky, big-headed beasts with bone-crushing jaws. They weren't graceful runners. Their gallop was more like the heavy bounds of a rhinoceros. Yet they were among the first mammals to step into the role of apex predator. To me, that's fascinating, to think of mammals, so long caged in the dark corners of the ecosystem, suddenly daring to claim the very role that had once belonged to the tyrant lizards. But they weren't alone. Another group, the hyaenodonts, appeared small at first, no bigger than medium-sized dogs. They had slender jaws, sharp shearing teeth, and a powerful sense of smell. They weren't the rulers yet, but they were perfect trackers, the kind of hunters that could follow a scent for miles. What's striking here is the contrast. Mesonychians relied on brute force, while hyaenodonts played the long game with precision and patience. That kind of duality feels so human, two different strategies for survival, both competing to shape the future. And tucked quietly among these carnivores were even stranger, gentler pioneers, the Plesiodopithores. They were small, tree-dwelling mammals, early relatives of primates, nibbling fruit and insects in the canopy. Their presence may not sound dramatic, but think about it, in those fragile, humid forests, these little creatures carried the spark that would, millions of years later, ignite the rise of primates and eventually, us. I can't help but feel a personal connection here. Somewhere in those wide Danian forests, among the silence and the shadows, the very first branch of our family tree was beginning to grow. What I love most about this moment in time is that mammals were not yet kings, they were experimenters. Some stumbled, some thrived, some vanished, but every new form, from shrew-sized omnivores to bear-sized Mesonychians, was a test, a rehearsal for what mammals could become. Their time in the spotlight was still young, but their ambition was clear. And soon, as the skies began to stir again and the forests filled with more color, the story of life would take another turn, toward the creatures of the air. The silence above was about to break. If you had lifted your eyes to the heavens in the early Danian, you might have been struck by what was missing. For over 100 million years, the skies had been alive with the shadows of pterosaurs and the cries of countless bird species. But now, silence reigned. The asteroid had not only cut down the dinosaurs, it had also shattered the chorus of wings. Only a handful of bird lineages managed to cross the boundary, most of them small, ground-dwelling, or water-loving. Imagine ponds scattered with duck-like shapes or chicken-sized survivors picking through debris. It's humbling to realize that our modern birds, the eagles, owls, and some birds we know today, all trace back to these fragile remnants that barely held on. And the insects, those tireless builders of ecosystems, were just as shaken. Pollinators had been hammered by the collapse of flowering plants. Without blossoms, bees and butterflies lost their fuel. Without insects, forests lacked their great recyclers, their hidden engines of growth. Slowly, as the angiosperms began to recover, insects followed, butterflies fluttered back into the humid air, dragonflies skimmed the rivers again, and beetles crawled beneath the bark. Piece by piece, the silent web was rewoven. What strikes me here is how delicate the balance truly was. The forests might have looked alive, but without pollinators buzzing between blossoms, they were incomplete, like a stage missing its orchestra. And yet, this slow rebound was essential, because when insects returned, they carried pollen, and when pollen spread, fruits and seeds flourished, and with fruits came the Plesiodopithores, those early primate relatives we just met in the last chapter, climbing through the canopy and tasting the first sweet rewards. In a very real way, the recovery of the sky and the return of pollinators helped open the door for our own evolutionary story. When I think about this, it feels almost poetic. The silence of the skies was temporary, and out of that hush came the chance for something entirely new. The air would never again belong to pterosaurs. Instead, it would slowly be claimed by birds, bees, and the ancestors of our own primate line, bound together in a fragile, interdependent dance. And while the skies were healing, the oceans were already roaring with new predators. Because beneath the waves, another kingdom had risen, one filled with teeth sharper and more ancient than any sword. The age of sharks was underway. While the land was quiet and tentative, the oceans were anything but. Beneath the waves, the Danian was a world of predators, restless, ancient, and armed with teeth. With the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs erased in the extinction, a new dynasty surged to fill the void. It wasn't the mammals, not yet, it was the sharks. Of the 28 families of sharks swimming in the Cretaceous seas, 25 made it through the impact. That's staggering when you think about it. While 3 out of every 4 species on Earth perished, sharks kept cruising as though nothing had changed. Within less than a million years, they had already produced giants. The genus Otodus, ancestors of the later megalodon, swelled in size. Some individuals as large as modern great whites, and possibly longer than 30 feet. Imagine standing on a Paleocene beach and realizing that the largest predator alive was prowling just offshore. Its shadow bigger than a city bus. For me, that image sends a chill. The seas may have lost their reptiles, but they gained something just as terrifying. And it wasn't only sharks. Other oddities rose in this strange new ocean. Ediphodon, a massive chimera, looked almost like a ghost from another era, with a blunt-toothed jaw plate designed to crush shells and cut flesh. Fossils show it reached more than 11 feet long, gliding silently through the water like some armored phantom. Then there were the early knifefish, eel-like predators with fang-shaped teeth, and the bizarre Colosoma near the Chicxulub crater, covered in rough, barnacle-like armor, part fish and part coral in appearance. They were the experiments of evolution, brief flashes of forms that would vanish before our time, and haunting these waters a little longer were perhaps the last ammonites. For decades, scientists believed they all perished instantly with the dinosaurs. But fossils from Denmark and New Jersey suggest that a few species survived for as long as 500,000 years after the impact. They weren't giants like their ancestors, but still, the thought that spiral-shelled ammonites drifted in Danian seas is incredible. It tells us extinction isn't always a clean break, sometimes ghosts linger. To me, the oceans of the Danian are a reminder of resilience at its rawest. Sharks seized opportunity, mutants swam in strange shapes, and ancient lineages flickered one last time before fading away. If the land felt hushed, the seas roared with energy, a theater of survival written in teeth and armor. And as the oceans stabilized and life pushed forward, the stage was nearly set. On land, the reptiles held their grip, but the mammals were stirring, testing new forms, and beginning to climb toward destiny. The question wasn't if they would rise, but when, and that story, of course, leads us straight to the origins of our own path. Looking back at the Danian, I'm struck by how survival is never about strength alone. The T-Rex was strong, the mosasaurs were strong, but when the sky fell, it wasn't strength that mattered. It was resilience, patience, and the ability to bend without breaking. Crocodiles endured because they could slow their lives to a crawl. Turtles thrived because they carried fortresses on their backs and ate almost anything. Snakes survived because they could hide, slip through cracks, and wait. And the tiny mammals, our distant ancestors, made it not by fighting, but by adapting, by staying small, by being endlessly resourceful. If I were to distill the Danian into 3 survival laws, here's what they would be. First, small and flexible beats big and specialized. The giants vanished because their lives demanded too much. The survivors endured because they could live on less, move in different ways, and shift their habits. Second, a broad diet is the best insurance. The creatures that could eat plants, insects, carrion, or just about anything found a way forward while picky feeders starved. And third, shelter and efficiency matter more than power. In an age of darkness and scarcity, it was the creatures that wasted the least energy, those that hid, burrowed, or slowed their metabolisms, who lasted long enough to see the light return. I find these lessons deeply human, because aren't we also facing a world in flux? Climate change, vanishing habitats, shifting ecosystems, challenges not so different from those ancient storms. Our survival as a species won't depend on being the biggest or most dominant. It will depend on our flexibility, our willingness to diversify, and our ability to protect the shelters, the ecosystems that sustain us. And here's the thought that always gives me chills, the timing. Shrew-like mammals of the Danian had no idea what their descendants would become. Yet from their fragile survival came primates, apes, and eventually us. We are living proof that even in the shadow of apocalypse, survival can see greatness. So, the next time you hear the silence of a forest or look into the stillness of the sea, remember the Damien. Remember that survival is not just about who roared the loudest, it's about who could endure the longest. And maybe ask yourself, if the world were to reset tomorrow, what survival law would we carry with us? If you stayed with me through this journey, thank you. If you love exploring prehistoric survival and the hidden lessons it offers for our own future, please give this video a like, subscribe, and share it with others. It keeps this channel alive and fuels me to bring you even more stories from deep time. Until next time, remember, every survivor writes the next chapter of life's story. What if I told you that in just 24 hours, 75% of all life on Earth was wiped away? That a mountain-sized asteroid slammed into our planet, turning forests into ash, oceans into acid, and skies into endless night? For 3 long years, the Earth was trapped in a twilight of death, where the sun itself was hidden behind a curtain of fire and dust. Imagine walking through that world, the smell of decay in every breath, silence pressing against your ears where once the roars of giants shook the ground. The mighty dinosaurs, rulers for over 160 million years, suddenly stood on the edge of extinction. And yet, some creatures clung to life, small, fragile, but unbroken. They would inherit the Earth, and from their survival, a new age would rise, one that would eventually shape the destiny of humankind. This is not just the story of how the dinosaurs fell. It is the tale of what came after, the forgotten age where crocodiles, snakes, turtles, and the first tiny mammals battled to endure in a broken world. It is a saga of resilience, adaptation, and survival against impossible odds. Stay with me until the end, because every detail of this journey will change the way you see life on Earth, and even the origins of our own story. And if you love prehistoric survival and the epic saga of life, give this video a like, subscribe, and share it, so I have the fire to bring you even more stories of our ancient past. Shall we step into the first sunrise after the end of the dinosaurs? When the dust finally began to clear and the planet caught its first breaths of recovery, the world that emerged looked strangely familiar and yet utterly alien. From space, the map of Earth in the Damien would have looked almost like the one we know today. The continents had already drifted close to their modern positions, and if you squinted, you could trace out the outlines of North America, Europe, Asia, and the scattered southern lands. But when you stepped onto the ground, the resemblance ended. This was no longer the vibrant Cretaceous paradise. The climate was warmer than ours today, wrapped in a blanket of heavy humidity. Picture endless wetlands and subtropical air that clung to your skin, rivers snaking through low valleys, and clouds building every afternoon like a drumbeat of storms. It was a world pressing fast forward on recovery, but the details were still fragile and uneven. And then there were the forests. Before the impact, dense jungles of redwoods, ginkgos, flowering plants, and ferns stretched across continents, feeding the appetites of giants. Now, the forests had been stripped of their diversity. Many of those families were gone or reduced to shadows. Instead, conifers had staged a comeback. Certain hardy genera, the survivors of the blast, spread almost everywhere. Imagine walking for miles and miles, yet seeing the same sharp silhouettes of needle-like leaves repeating endlessly. A canopy, yes, but one monotonous and quiet, without the deep variety that once fueled Cretaceous ecosystems. And yet, even here, life whispered promises. Small pockets of flowering plants began creeping back, the early steps of a long takeover that would eventually reshape every forest on Earth. It reminds me of something deeply human, how even after devastation, we don't just rebuild, we reinvent. The forests of the Damien were not the same as before, and that loss is real. But in that loss was the seed of what would later become the ecosystems that shaped primates, and eventually us. When I think about walking through those forests, what strikes me most isn't just the sameness of the trees, it's the silence. No thundering footsteps of sauropods, no screech of pterosaurs, just the hum of insects struggling back to life, and the rustle of smaller creatures testing this fragile stage. It was beautiful, yes, but also unsettling, like standing inside the ruins of a great cathedral that once echoed with life. And this silence sets us up perfectly for the next chapter. if the giants were gone? Then who would rise to fill the power vacuum? The answer, surprisingly, wasn't the mammals just yet. It was the reptiles who seized their moment. With the dinosaurs gone, you might expect mammals to step forward immediately, taking the throne and beginning their unstoppable climb toward dominance. But the truth is far stranger. For millions of years after the asteroid, it wasn't the furry newcomers who ruled. It was the reptiles, patient, resilient, and built for hard times. Crocodiles, for instance, barely missed a beat. Their slow metabolism, amphibious lifestyle, and generalist diet meant they could ride out the darkness while others starved. In the Danian, they didn't just survive, they thrived. Some stayed in the water, lurking as ambushed predators in rivers and swamps. Others, like the fearsome Sebesids, adapted fully to life on land, stalking prey with powerful jaws and muscular limbs. Imagine walking along a riverbank and realizing that the largest carnivore around wasn't a mammal at all, but a crocodilian. That, to me, is a chilling thought. These creatures were nature's timeless survivors, already shaping the food webs of the new Earth. Snakes, too, seized their opportunity. They had slithered beneath the notice of giants during the Cretaceous, but now the stage was theirs. With fewer predators and competitors, snakes exploded in diversity. Some species grew to lengths of over 10 feet, making them among the largest animals on land at the time. Picture the silence of those conifer forests we just explored, and then the sudden glide of a massive serpent through the undergrowth. I can't help but think, in a world stripped bare, adaptability and stealth were the ultimate weapons. And then, of course, there were the turtles. They might not sound terrifying, but make no mistake, turtles were among the greatest winners of the extinction. Roughly 80% of their species made it across the boundary, compared to only about 7% of mammals. That number alone tells you everything. Their shells were fortresses, their metabolism slow, their diets flexible. In many ways, they represent the very essence of survival. Yet, their abundance came with a price. They became the buffet of the Danian. Fossil evidence shows crocodiles in particular feasting on them often. Even so, turtles spread into rivers, lakes, and coastlines everywhere, a quiet army of survivors. To me, this chapter of Earth's history is humbling. It reminds us that survival is not about being the biggest or the fiercest. It's about being able to wait, to bend, and to endure when the world collapses. And as mammals, our own ancestors crept along the edges of this reptile-dominated world. They must have seemed small and insignificant, but their time was coming. The power vacuum would not stay in reptilian hands forever. Soon, the mammals would begin to test their limits, and some would even dare to hunt. For most of the Cretaceous, mammals lived in the shadows. They were tiny, shrew-like creatures, scurrying in the underbrush, mostly nocturnal, careful not to draw the attention of predators that could swallow them whole. But in the Danian, with the giants gone, something remarkable happened. Those small, nervous survivors began to experiment. They didn't explode overnight into lions and elephants, but they did start to push boundaries, testing what was possible in a world suddenly free of tyrannosaurs.